Hi, I'm Jay. I am the lead developer, lead creator, marketer, everything of Midinous. I'm the face behind the channel. If you haven't seen me or don't know about me from my main channel, I created Midinous, and unfortunately I haven't given you an update since December of 2021 on this channel. Sorry about that. Lots changed with the program, and I don't know if you've been following or waiting for updates. The program is not dead. So today I'm just coming to you. I want to show you or tell you about all of the things that have happened with Midinous in the past 3 years and what I plan to do for 2024. So I'm just on the Steam news page. I'm on the Steam news pages, and I'm looking at the posts that I made. If you haven't been keeping up in the Discord, or if you're literally just on this channel waiting for me to say something, here I am. So, Midinous came out for macOS on December 20th, 2021. And after that, I hadn't posted anything on this channel. So, January 13th, 2022, 1.0.3 released. I fixed a few things and added a new MIDI port. I'm looking at change log. Externalized clock messages to a separate port, the Midinous clock port. I fixed backup path saving strange directory names. I hope you're updating. After 1.0.3, there was a huge hiatus, and I didn't update the program until May of the following year in 23, and that was 1.1.5.0. So I added Linux support in 2023 in May. I added an audio device picker to Midinous in the options menu, in the general options, that allows you to pick from any device on your computer, including sample rate. 1.1.5.0 had a huge boost to the audio subsystem, and it made it a lot faster, and especially for sequences causing your computer to become a space heater. That didn't happen after this update. I also added CC objects, so change control message objects, or control change objects. You can place them in the program, and they send MIDI data just like they would send a note, but they're sending CC instead. This update also had the introduction of logic points, which are basic logic gates like AND, OR, and the negation of those gates. This means you can chain them up to mute points for right now. The document scale and the relative scale got 2 new options. User scale. You can configure these in the options menu. You can choose from any of the 12 semitones in an octave, including all of them. You can mimic what's already there in the program or come up with your own. This update also added left-handed mouse mode, different wave types to the internal synth. I added some sound effects to the program to make it more fun. I added indicators to tell you when a sequence would end. And each channel that Midinous can output, or that can work in the program, can be assigned to a different wave. So you could create an ensemble of waves depending on the channel. I wanted this to be more accessible to people who don't have a DAW. So I thought that adding these different waves, giving a little bit more leeway in the way that Midinous works for people without a DAW, might introduce people to music without them needing a DAW. I don't think I'm going to do more than basic waves at this point, but I think the ability to control the length of those notes and put them so close together, you can create some really interesting sounds. There were cosmetic changes as well. Some items moved around on the interface, and I added some new things. Check out the full 1.1.5.0 patch notes in the link below. 1.1.5.0 was the biggest update I think I've ever released. It added new features, it completely redesigned how Midinous works, made it more performant, and it allowed me to implement the system and refactor the code in such a way that additional updates would be easier. The way I wrote it means I can add any object I want to the canvas. So aside from CC and logic points, there might be more points in the future you can choose from. 1.1.6.0, after several hotfixes, was another huge update. This was in June of 23, and I really went hard in June because this is when Ben Jordan's video about Midinous released, and I got a lot of support from a lot of people, and I realized then how big Midinous could be. And this is the reason I'm making this video. I'm coming to you and telling you about the product because I do care, and it is not a dead project at all, and I've got huge plans for it. So 1.1.6.0 had a bunch of fixes, but really the most important thing is I actually released a full documentation for the program that you can get with the latest update, and you can also get there on the Midinous issues GitHub page, which again, All of these links will be below. I'm not going to muddy the video with them, but they'll be in the description. I don't know if you've ever written technical manuals or if you've ever had to write a manual for a product, but that was a huge undertaking. And unfortunately, that manual hasn't been localized yet. I'm waiting for Midinous to reach a state where I can focus more on the documentation, bring in a localization team, and get those things updated. So right now it's in English, but in the future I do intend to have more languages available for both the manual and the program itself. 1165 added more features to the MIDI input and output of the program. Because of the audio backend changes I made in 1150, some sequences were not running correctly, and it would really depend on system, and it wasn't happening to everybody. But before that, the thread, like the worker thread inside the program, would take up an entire core to run the sequence as fast as it could, so that it would be as accurate as possible. In 1150, I moved that into what's called the audio callback function, which runs when the program starts. It basically takes an audio device from your system and uses that to run the MIDI inside. That's where all the MIDI was running. That's where the sequence code was running. In 1165, I added back the option to have Midinous run as fast as possible, which means it will distribute itself over all of your computer cores and try to run as quickly as it can and as accurately as it can. This helps in a lot of situations, but you will get about a 20% performance hit. 1165 saw the introduction of a triplet grid, which you can turn on in the toolbox on the left. MIDI input also became available. If you select your MIDI device, whether it's a controller or another program that sends MIDI, if you select that in the options menu, then it has some specific interactions with the program, especially when points are selected. I want to expand this in the future, but for right now, it's just modifying points that you select. So if you select a point in Midinous and you hit a key on your keyboard, it will set Midinous to the velocity and the key that you hit. I added basic syncing to external hardware and gear. If you turn on external clock in the program, it will sync with transport messages, but it won't take clock messages in just yet. I'm still working on that. The code behind it when I'm not using a real-time language like C# is tough. And people have been asking for it for a long time, and I'm working on a solution. I promise you that I will find something that works. I will find a compromise to allow clock messages to sync Midinous without much problem. Notes got a probability option, so you can choose how likely those points are to play when they're hit from a traveler. I added autosaves to the program, occurring every 5 minutes, saving your last hour of work. And this saw the introduction of MIDI output files. It'll keep the latest 5 for the project selected. Every time you press play and stop, it will render a MIDI file you can use in other processes. If you're traveling and you're using Midinous on the fly, you have a sequence that you created but you don't have a DAW, it will create the MIDI for you, and you can import that into your DAW later. 1168 was the next update, and that saw an improvement to the audio system, where if you select devices, they should load back up when you load Midinous again, assuming that no hardware changes were made. I know some people have mixers, like I have a mixer, that if I turn it off and the audio device isn't available, then Midinous will just pick the first available that it can. Copying and pasting properties got keybinds for the control modifier, and you can change those in the keybindings options. 1170 is the last update I released for Midinous so far. It was the last one in 2023 in November, and it introduced a MIDI through port. So any MIDI that was coming into the input for Midinous that you've had selected will just be mirrored to the through port so you can use it in another program. People were saying that if they were using their keyboard to affect Midinous, then they couldn't use it in another program. But the MIDI through port will allow you to use your keyboard and use the through port, which just mirrors everything that you're doing on your keyboard, to the host program. In 1170, I implemented the foundation to make external clock work with Midinous. So the way I did it was, travelers are recalculated every time they try to travel. And now, if there's a tempo change, the travelers will automatically affect their end time so that the tempo changes can be effective immediately, instead of what was the case where you'd change tempo, but a traveler would have to finish its life cycle before the next event would shoot off. Now everything is kept in sync and tempo changes. And that brings us to 2024. I have huge plans for 2024. I actually left my job to work on Midinous full time, and I'll have a video on my main channel about that more in detail. But I'm really pouring myself into the product, and I couldn't do it without your support. And I really appreciate everyone that has supported me on Patreon, that has bought my product, has told other people about my product. I don't have a big social presence. I don't have Twitter. I don't have Instagram. So really, it's y'all that have really been able to bring up Midinous and to a point where I felt comfortable actually leaving my job to support my product full time. So thank you. So I've got the roadmap up here, the 2024 roadmap. If you want the full details, you can get there via a link in the description. But I'm just going to go through them really quick to show you what I'm really planning for 2024 with Midinous. So I'd love to change the way Logic timing works. Right now it's really unpredictable because the way Logic is evaluated is sort of independent on the placement of points, and that causes issues with timing. So if you wanted a group of points to be muted at a certain time, since muting is really the only thing it can do right now, which I do want to improve, it wouldn't work the way you would expect. So if you had point A, B, C, and D, and A and C are sending out a traveler to B and D respectively, and B is connected to D via some logic gate like an AND, which means D would be muted when B is hit, then right now it's unpredictable whether D will play or won't play. And it has something to do with the placement of the points, like the order in which they're placed. So I'm going to change that. And right now the paradigm is traveler to point to player. So a traveler hits a point creates a player, and the cycle continues. But I want to change this to traveler activates what's called an actor, and an actor activates a traveler and a point, and then the point creates the player. And so with this middle ground, the actor, I can evaluate then what should play and shouldn't play based on logic with the actors before the travelers have a chance to be created and the point has a chance to activate. Tooltips will also now show truly instead of at the status bar at the bottom. I'd like them to show when you hover over something. So I've got it somewhat working, a basic implementation where you hover over a point and it will show you the information of that point. Right now it's really bare bones. I want it to show information when you hover over a path. I want it to show information when you hover over menu items. So I think I'll get that working, and that will be in the next update. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm really trying to get external clock working. The baseline is there so that travelers are affected immediately by time changes, tempo changes. Now it's trying to get the clock messages to sync with the program and not fall out of sync or not sound strange. So that's tough. It's really, really tough, especially because I'm using C#. It's not a real-time language. I can't just pause or delay or wait for something like an event to happen. So I'm working on it, working with some very smart people, some people who've worked on other audio programs, and I think there's a way, but we'll see. If it happens this year. I want to add things like sequence shuffle. I want to add humanize. I want to add seasonal decorations just for a little fun. I want to add Steam achievements because why not? I want a new point type called Terminator, which basically eats travelers after a certain number. It's kind of like a counter where travelers are going through a system and the Terminator gets hit, counts down from, let's say, 10, and then no travelers can pass through that point ever again. I want templates, sort of like blueprints, that you can create in other programs, and then there would be like a drop-down list. You can select different blueprints from your other programs and bring them in. This would be super handy for logic gates. Someone has created an 8-bit counter in Midinous, and I can only imagine it would have been easier if they had access to some kind of blueprints. Right now, people are going to their other projects, they're copying, pasting a chunk, opening the other project, pasting it, and I think that whole process can be way more accessible with a blueprint system. I want to add a mini-map, and that will allow you to navigate your project way more easily. Again, with these huge projects like computers, I can't even imagine how crazy it is trying to navigate something like that. There's groups and auto pans, but you only get 10, so a mini map I think would be a really good addition. And finally on this list I have audio export. I think the internal synth is a great option for people, and I think it would be better if what's played in Midinous is also outputted in some kind of buffer. And so you would have like the MIDI files that get generated when you play, you'd also have something like an audio file generated from what is played. And I think that would be a really cool thing to have. And that would really make it its own program. Like you wouldn't have to have anything else if you really didn't have access to anything else. The whole point of this is access to people who aren't musicians. I love seeing people come into this music realm not really knowing much, playing Midinous and being like, oh shit, this is actually, I can do this and this is fun. And that's the whole ethos. I don't want it to be an overly complex program. I don't want it to be bogged down with crazy semantics. I just want it to be this fun little tool that you can place things on, but also a tool that if you dig deeper is really rewarding and really quite musical. I think 2024 is the year that Midinous reaches its feature complete status. I am not done with it, certainly, but I want to move on to make Midinous run on hardware. I want it to have the ability to run headless. I want to make that headless mode open source. I think it's really clever to have Midinous as the level editor and have those patches run elsewhere, like not on the computer. Maybe on a Daisy and modular. Maybe eventually on a proprietary hardware device for Midinous specifically, where there's a grid of pads and you link up points on that pad. And I think the flow there, especially having two hands, would be really something that brings Midinous into the tactile realm instead of just the software realm. And the fact that Midinous has a free demo where you can generate and save projects just like normal, you have access to this open source headless mode. You have access to the editor in some limited form where you can save patches. You can run those patches in the headless form somewhere without having to run them in the program. And I think that's a super good open direction for Midinous to go in the future that is even more accessible to people. 2023 was the year that I realized Midinous can support me, and people like it, and people want to see more from it and more from me. And I think that really opened up the doors for me to do Midinous full-time, to leave my job and do these things because I love music and I love the community of musicians that I belong to, and I am in service to art. I want to be someone who perpetuates the idea of artistry without being bogged down by having to spend a lot for it. And Midinous right now is $25 in America and other places, but way less around the rest of the world. I wanted to make Midinous accessible to countries where the financial situation and the financial burden on the people who live there is much greater than where I live. And I recognize that privilege, and I recognize that accessibility to those things is tough. So in 2023, I changed the way Midinous was priced around the world to make it more fair for those folks. That's my goal. Accessibility. I want people to have fun. I want people to nurture their artistic self. Thank you for your support in 2023. In 2024, I am really looking forward to what I can do with Midinous. And if you would like to support me, I have a Patreon. I have my music on Bandcamp. Buy Midinous for a friend if you already have it. Pick up Midinous or wishlist it if you want it. And I will see you in the Steam discussions, on my Discord, and maybe here and on my main channel in 2024. Thanks.